Okay, everyone. Hope this finds you doing well. Here's a video that'll talk about getting set up in InDesign, which is the recommended program to use for this assignment. Some of you will want to use Illustrator, and if that's what you have and are comfortable with, that's fine. I think that for this project, getting familiar with InDesign would be a positive thing, especially because in Project 3, that would be, you're going to be using that program as well. You'll use both. Or you'll use maybe all three main Adobe programs, Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign. But this will get you going in InDesign. So the first thing I did is I'm in my Project 2 overview here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this content section. And this is assuming I've already done my research. I know a little bit about this company now. I get a sense of what they're about, what their vibe is, what their aesthetic is, etc. I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to copy, select this here, and I'm going to copy that, Command-C. In the Mac, there's a Control-C on PC. And the thing you're going to have to be aware of is when you copy something that's been put in Canvas, the formatting might be funky, okay? But go ahead and copy that. And then I'm going to go to InDesign, and I'm going to go to File, New. I'm going to create a new document here. And I'm going to make my 8x8 document. And I'm going to go ahead and put 5 pages in there. Because so the way I would do this is I would have each task as a separate InDesign document. That's just an easy way to keep it organized. So this is going to be task 1, okay? And I know that I'm going to do 3 to 5, so I'm going to put 5 pages in that for me. And then I'm not going to put any margins in there because I'm going to make a grid, and I'm just going to have it be, anything I do alignment-wise will be based on the grid. You can put margins in if you'd like. Either way is fine. There isn't a ton of information that we're working with, so a grid may not be absolutely necessary for you, but you'd be surprised how even with simple bits of information, how helpful it can be in terms of organizing your content in a way that is proportionately arranged in the space. Okay, so I have an 8x8 page, 5 pages in there. I've put 0 margins in there. I'm going to go ahead and hit Create, and I have my new document here. Okay, and if I go on my Pages palette here, I'll see that I have 5 pages in there. Okay, and one thing I might consider doing when I'm creating grids is I might want to have different grids for each composition. So one thing I can do is if I use my master pages here, I'm not sure if many of you have ever even looked up here, but your master pages are a cool way to set up templates, multiple templates within one document. Okay, so if I double click on my master page, I'm going to go up here to my layout section. I'm going to go to Create Guides. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and add a simple grid here. So I'm going to have it fit the guides to the page because I don't have any margins set up. I don't have any existing ruler guides on there already. If I had already dragged some guides and I wanted to make a new grid on top of that, I would hit that because it would clear all the guides that were already on the page. I'm going to go ahead and start with a simple 4x4, which would be 4 rows and 4 columns to create what's called a modular grid. All of these little sections are modules, okay? And you can break this up in a few different ways, and we'll talk about that. Let me get some more brightness here. So the gutter you can mess with if you want. The gutter is just this space here, okay? The space that divides the modules, okay? I'm not going to mess with that. Sometimes you can go thinner, sometimes you can go thicker, depending on what's working for you. Because again, we're not complicated here with content. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK for that. And now I'm gonna be fine. This is going to be a grid that I can use pretty easily. So now the one thing about adding your pages first, which I've already done, is they're all A master pages. They're all based on the A master. So maybe I add an extra step here because if I want to go in and create another master page, for example. So now watch, if I click on page 1, all these pages, you can see that grid is there because they're A master pages. Okay. If I want to simply turn my grids off quickly, on the Mac it's Command semicolon. So is that Control semicolon for you PC folks? Okay, but it's just View, Grids and Guides, Hide Guides or Show Guides, etc. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and keep those on, and I'm going to go up here back to my this section above. And I'm going to click on my options here. Okay, if that doesn't show for you, make sure you can click on this little dialog here, and it'll give you your options because maybe you're not seeing all the possibilities here. But I'm going to go ahead and put New Master. Okay, the first one's called A. I'm just going to let that one be called B. It's the same size and everything. I'm not going to change it. You could change it if you wanted to. I don't need to here. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the B master, okay? So if I double click on that, I'm there, and I'm going to make another grid. I'm going to go back to my create guides, and I'm going to do one here that, this seems overly complicated, but it doesn't have to be. I'm going to go a 9 by 9 here, okay? Now, why for the information that I have am I going to have to make something this complicated? Again, you really don't have to. When you start to bring in images and things, it might be helpful. But one way to look at a grid is to think about the space in a few different ways. If I just let me do this here. Here's a module, right? Let me put some color in there real quick. Let's just add a color in there so we see what's happening, okay? That's one module, okay? And this has many units, as you can see, but also this could be a module, okay? That could be a section that you then break up across your pages, and it might not break up evenly here. So that's one thing you got to think about in terms of how many modules you use. That would be a module here. This would be a module here, okay? And what these are doing are helping you organize your space proportionally, okay? If you wanted to, you could also make this whole section into a module, okay? It depends on how you want to break up that space, all right? And you'll see sometimes, depending on how many you've put, sometimes they'll break up evenly, okay? All right, so now all of a sudden I could break it up like this, and something that seemingly has so many sections actually can be broken down pretty simply, okay? And there I have a 9-unit grid, that's on top with an underlying structure that gives me more options for aligning things, okay? And again, these are just to illustrate how you can break up the space in different ways, okay? So for example here, okay, this is one of the examples we looked at. This is like, okay, how is this sitting on a grid? Okay, well, grids, the key thing to know is that grids are there to help you, and they serve you as the designer. They don't dominate your work, okay? So they help you, they're useful tools, but they don't have to take over the layout. So for example, in this one, if I turn on my guides, I can see that this one is a 16-unit grid, 16 module grid, right? That simple 4x4. And the way this is broken up here is that this is considered a quadrant, this is a quadrant, this is one, and this is one. So this sort of sort of askew type of layout is really just, the size is good, the spacing is fine. There's not a lot of real refinement or alignment tweaks or anything, but it's just organized in a way that maybe has a little movement, maybe it's somewhat dynamic for as simple of a layout as it is, and it's just occupying this space here. So it's not just randomly thrown in this page somewhere, it's actually considered in terms of being in that lower quadrant. So there's a proportional breakup of space in this negative space, okay? So one thing that I noticed in this project, and especially because typically, like I said, I don't show these examples, I have people explore on their own and then we look at the examples. So what you're seeing is, examples that incorporate a lot of white space, which is a good thing. And I think there's a tendency in this assignment, in the beginning especially, is for students to fill all the space up, which you don't have to do, okay? So if you look at how this simple grid is applied, you look at how it was applied in some of the other examples, okay? Here it is where it's this little blob of overlap and visual interest is aligned pretty perfectly here, the main bulk of it in this third row, okay? With this other one set at about a 45-degree angle, and the axis is connecting to, this little point here. So even that, when you turn off the grid, it's broken up in a way that it lays out on that page in a way that feels, even though it's sort of organic looking and somewhat, there's some movement happening, it's still proportionally broken up in that space, okay? Same goes for even something simple like this. This pile of type lives essentially in that lower row with a little bit of overlap here. And this one, the axis basically aligns right on this little section here. And again, this is a random angle, okay? But again, it's broken up in a way that shows some proportional awareness of the space, okay? Something like this, which is, we're getting ahead of the game because you're not using lines and rules yet, you'll use that in task 3. what you'll see is that these rules, they're visual, they're just graphic elements. They also solidify the layout without these lines in here. So if I select these real quick and get rid of them, let's see here. Oh, that one might be, get rid of those, and then get rid of this one and this one, okay? You could say that that layout still works, you know, it's fine. With that really open line spacing, which is something we don't typically do, but the reason why that's happening here is you can see that the beginning here, these align directly across the gutter, so they share the same baseline. These alternate baselines, okay? So there's just a little bit of a dynamic setup that way, to where it'd be less interesting if these all aligned on every line. It would become almost too much. It would feel too, if the whole thing was lined up like this, it'd be less dynamic. This slight offset adds a little bit of more dynamism to it. And then having these lines in here solidifies the structure in a way. It sort of holds everything together. And what you can see that those lines, they're not just placed randomly, they're actually aligned perfectly on the grid. So all the lines that are placed in that layout sit on one of the lines of the grid. Now their lengths are just done sort of eyeball by eyeball, and they're arranged in a way that fits. I mean, you could do that in myriad ways. Okay, so you're going to have to use your discretion as a designer there. But you can see that something that you might not be aware of the structure in terms of how these are placed. There is some planning there and some placement there. Okay, even something like this. You know, it's essentially 45 degrees and its axis is hanging right on the center of the layout. Okay, so, you know, that's all the same layout. Here's that other one repeated again. If you have one with when you get into task 4, you use reversed type out of shape. Here's an example of it, reverse type out of a very simple rectangle. And the way that sits in that space is it's aligned directly in that second column at the very top. Okay, so that's one way to use grids. I mean, you can see something here. Here's an image that's been incorporated into a layout. This is going to be later on when you're getting into like task 5 or maybe 7 actually. Task 7, your very last one you're using images. Here's a very simple layout, and you can tell pretty much it's centered. So we get it. But the way it sits in that simple grid, same 4x4. Is it's considered in terms of how it's sitting in that space. That same sort of grid is, you can take that's the same photo, just broken up and moved around these boxes, so where all you're seeing is the shadows, and the random colors are placed, and everything's sitting on that grid. So everything's lined up according to that grid. Okay, so when you do that, it's going to be hard to arrange it in a way that doesn't feel proportional, and that's a good thing. Okay, so here's an example of a very simple alignment, but it's flush right. So sometimes go flush right, not just flush left all the time. If it works for your particular layout, and in this case it would, because where it's sitting on the page, it works better flush right than flush left. You get some different weights going, all of that stuff. Okay, so I'm going to copy and paste this because this is going to give us some consideration for detailing out the type that we're going to want to talk about. And then these are for later when you're getting into image, but here's a more complex grid, more of it like a 9x9. And again, you can see the way things are laid out, even the way these shapes, they're masking these images, the way they sit in there, it's right on the point of the grid here. And again, where that sits, it feels proportional to how the space is broken up. The way that this sits in here, it's framed within these last 3 rows. Okay, it's kind of evenly. I mean, it's a pretty organically aligned block of information, but it's done so in a way that still feels like it's connecting to these last 3 rows, and it's pretty even on. This extends over here a little bit more than the type does over here, but it works given the rest of the elements. Okay. So again, the grid is there to provide you a structure, and sometimes you can stick really tightly to it and have things align right on it, and other times you can use it just as spatial reference points to help you break up and place information in a way that feels considered, okay, at the end of the day. And again, as you can see later, you're going to get into using different sizes, and this is really you're going to actually can get much more experimental than this, okay, down the line going forward. So a couple different ways to use grids, okay. The other thing you're going to want to consider doing is, here's our original layout here. Let me go back to, so as you can see, using those master pages, you can add as many master pages as you want and create the different types of grids you'd like. So if I wanted to come in here, and I'm going to take these off of here because these will, whatever you put on your master page will show up. When I add a page here, if I click on this master page and I just pull it into my pages here, and it goes into my layout, or into my document, I should say. Now here's page 1, page 2. You can see it has those blocks of color on there, and I can't click on them to delete them because they're on my master page. Okay. There are ways to do it. You can hold Shift and click, and Shift and Command and click, and it'll allow you to click on those items on the actual page and delete them, but you can see they'll still be on your master page. All right, the best thing to do is, if I'm not going to need these, I'm going to just get rid of them on my master page, and I'm going to keep the grid there. So now when I go back to my second page, or I add a third page, for example, I'm going to do another B page here. My page 3 has nothing but the grid, okay? So I can turn that grid off by Command or Control semicolon really easily. And I can see that my page 1, which is an A master, has that grid, and my page 2, which is a B master, has that grid. Okay? Pretty straightforward. All right. So the other thing that you're going to want to do is when you bring in that type, which we've copied and pasted, but I've already gone and copied something else. So let me put this in here real quick. Okay. I'm going to set that aside here, and I'm going to actually make that. I'll go to my paragraph. I'm going to make this flush left. Okay, we'll deal with that later. Now, one thing that you're going to notice in InDesign, see how I brought this in here, and I don't have this selected, but this frame is showing. So, for example, if I'm going to go ahead and make a new text block. Okay, and I'm going to go back to my content here, and I'm going to copy that. Okay, and I'm going to go to my InDesign document, and I'm going to paste that in here. Okay, that's just straight from the, you can see that the way the lines are breaking here, it needs to be tweaked a little bit because the way it's formatted in Canvas is a little bit different. Okay, but you can see when when I'm not selecting these things, these boxes are showing, and that really bugs me. I don't want to see that. So if I go to View and I go to Extras, I can go to Hide Frame Edges, and they'll be gone. Okay, much easier to work with. All right, so you know, this is just the type as it is raw. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to want to make this Helvetica, okay? Because whatever the typeface is, it's going to change alignment, and it's going to change how the characters are set up. So I'm going to go ahead and make this and turn this into Helvetica. I'm going to start with Helvetica regular, okay? Now look at that. It's coming in here at 12 point, which is the default, and I have 14.4 points of line spacing, which is also the default. And you can tell it's the default because it has the parentheses around it here for the line spacing. Doesn't have the parentheses on the size, but it will show up as in the spacing values. Okay, so right away I know that if I was to print this, this is going to look bad. It's just going to look chunky and weird and funky. Okay, this is at 9. Which is a good starting point, you know. Around that's a good size for Helvetica to start with. You can go slightly smaller too, but I think anything below 8 gets tiny, and 8 itself can be pretty small. But the difference between these two is that this has a little more detail put to it than this does, not just in size and spacing, but some other things we want to talk about here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and reformat my type. So if I select this, if I go on the Mac, if I go to Option Command I, which I guess would be Control, what is that? Alt Control for you guys on the PC. It's just under Type, Show or Hide Hidden Characters. Okay, so you can just find it there. But if I go and I look here in my hidden characters, I'm going to see where the returns are. This paragraph symbol will show you where the hard returns are. So I can see there's a hard return here from Canvas. I'm going to go ahead and put that there, put my space in there. See when there's here too, I'm going to go ahead and push that there. I don't mind that there's a hard return here necessarily. There's better ways to handle that, which we'll talk about. But I don't want this, I don't like this breaking here, so I'm going to open this up a little bit. Okay, so I can have that whole, everything on that line. And here's another hard return here, so I'm going to delete that, put my space in there. Okay, so you're going to get it just roughly set up. You can rearrange this stuff, but I know that I don't have any weird returns in there now, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off those invisible characters, those hidden characters. Okay, so the first thing I start to do is I just rough it out. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just make this 9 point to start, and I'm going to add some line spacing here. You know, maybe a few points, maybe 9 on 12 to start. Now you can see the difference here. See how we have this space between blocks of copy versus this? These are those double returns we saw because they're hard returns with double returns. These feel overly open, okay, which I don't want to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my paragraph palette, and I'm going to select this paragraph, and I'm going to go, if you don't see all these, you can go into show options in your paragraph palette. And if you just hover over, here's a first line indent, here's a space before paragraph, here's a space after paragraph. I'm going to go ahead and add some space before my paragraphs, okay? Now you're going to see this jump open hugely, okay? And what's happening is that anywhere there's a hard return, this extra space has been added, okay? So I want to go in and delete those hard returns. And to do a soft return, you're going to hit Shift Return, okay? I'm going to delete this and then Shift Return. Okay, I'm going to delete this one, and now I have my space between paragraphs. I'm going to delete this one, and I have my space between paragraphs. So you'll see now, whenever I add more space, okay, it'll add or take out that space, for example. Okay, so I can customize this to whatever I want. For our purposes here, let's go to 0.115. Maybe 0.075. Let's see where that 0.625. Let's go to 0.075. I know this is the nitpicky details you want to be thinking about, though. This is what makes your stuff better than the other person's, okay? Better than the competition. So I have a basic setup here with some space between paragraphs that feels pretty good. If I'm going to alter the size of my type, you know, if I'm going to come down in size, maybe if I go to 8.5, for example, you know, I'm going to have to decide then, all right, now my line spacing looks a little too open, so I'm going to probably have to match that. I'm going to go maybe 11.5 here and see how that feels. Or maybe I'll go to 11.25 and see how that feels. Now the trick is, because we're on the screen, man, it's just not the same as it is in print. And you can see even when I zoom in, it feels different. But at this size and line spacing values, I'm feeling pretty good. You know, but you can explore. Okay, so I have my type set up in here in a way that's roughly pretty good. All right. One thing I'm going to notice though is if I zoom in here, I'm always looking for parentheses, and especially when they deal with phone numbers when I'm working with type. And as if you can, you might be able to see here, this is too low. These parentheses are too low, you know, they're dipping below the baseline and they don't align here. They just feel off, okay? So I'm going to select my type tool, and I'm going to select this one. I'm going to go to my character palette. I want to go to my baseline shift here, all right? And I'm going to go ahead and eyeball. See, if I add 1, now it's too high. So I'm going to go to 0.75, see how that does. Let's see what 0.5 feels like. Okay, that feels better. Go to 0.5 here, and that feels pretty good. All right, that's feeling way better. Do I want to do that with this with the plus symbol here for my phone number? You know, let's try it. Maybe 0.5 for there as well. Okay. I also feel like this is a little tight, so I'm going to put my cursor in there. I'm going to go to my kerning function. Okay. I'm actually going to add a little bit of space. All right. And I'm going to do that same thing for all of my main information. I'm going to go ahead and close up some space here. Okay. Maybe this feels like it's a little too open. etc. I'm going to take that, I'm going to do that. Now I'm not going to do that with, I'm not necessarily going to do that with all of these letters, but for the main kind of, the address stuff, anything that looks to open, especially with numerals, numerals get pretty funky spacing wise. I might tweak some things here, maybe on the website, do I feel like that aligns pretty well? Not bad. This one feels pretty good, maybe a little tight there. I'll give it a little space there, okay? And I'm going to get this dialed in a way that feels really good, because then I'm going to use this same copy. Once I get it dialed in like this, I'm going to use it throughout my tasks. Okay, so I'm going to have my little master block of type here. I'm going to copy that now. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. I'm going to make this task 1. Okay, I'm going to go to my desktop, and you put it where you want. If I put it here in my classes and I go to my projects and I go to project 2, I'll put, you're going to put it wherever you want. I'm going to put it to task 1. Okay, and I'm going to make a new folder, which I just did. I'm going to save that task 1 in my task 1 folder. Okay, and now I'm going to start to explore my layouts. Okay, which is, again, I'm using one size and one weight. So as I can see here, if my size is 8.5, I'm using 8.5 throughout the entire layout. Okay. Once I can add a second weight, now here's an example of a couple different weights, and the sizes are pretty close. I think there's maybe these are a little bit larger. Okay, so this is that's 9. Oh, it's all 9. So you can see all the same size here, just different weights. Okay, so that would be like a task 2, one size, 2 weights. Okay. And you can see that this one's, even just the rough layout we did here, this one feels a little more refined. So my sizes are, my size is 9, my spacing is 12.75. The other thing you can do is, if you want to, you can set your what to start before you start tweaking your spacing. You can use the metrics for optical. I typically use that for display, larger type. For text, smaller size type, I'll default it to the metrics setting, and then after that you can go in and do your tweaking like we did in here. Okay, so those are a couple different things to think about. Okay, the last thing I would say is the master pages. Okay, that's an important thing, but maybe what I'll do, because this video is getting long, I'll get that in another video for you with a couple other odds and ends. But that should get you up and running in InDesign. And if you have any specific questions, let me know, and we'll go from there. Thanks, guys.